Welcome to the Northeast Kingdom Voice. I'm your host, Scott Wheeler. Today's guest is Justin Christopher, the owner of Deadhead Taxidermy. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Scott. I've been looking forward to this.
When I think of Deadhead, when I saw it first, I automatically thought the Grateful Dead, because don't they call the Grateful Dead followers Deadheads?
They absolutely do. And I'd be lying to you if I said that the band itself wasn't a small inspiration for the name. Traditionally, like what a deadhead is, you can see these skulls back here. Often you'll find one of those out in the woods just from a deer passing for whatever reason.
Right.
And we've always referred to them as deadheads. And obviously what I'm doing with this company, we're working with dead animal heads. So I thought, that was the most clever thing I could think of. But, growing up, I've always been big on music, big from the 60s, 70s, classic rock, all that. And, the Grateful Dead has been a pretty big part of my life for quite some time. So it kind of all just came together.
So were you old enough to go to the Fish Festival?
No. So I think I was, what year was that? 2001?
I don't know.
Somewhere.
Maybe 2000.
Long time ago, anyways.
Yeah.
But I remember being a kid, living on Main Street and Derby Line. And I think I was like, 10 years old, maybe. 2004, thanks. And I remember, all these people walking by. And I didn't know what was going on. Didn't know, the whole band or anything like that. And I remember asking my dad, who are all these homeless people? Where are they going? And, it's funny, like, in hindsight, now I've been to, a couple fish shows, and my wife, she's a big fish head, too, so kind of made a full circle and understanding the whole scene and the appreciation of the music and all that. But no, I did not venture my way into the airport there for the show.
I went to it to record it as history, so I wrote about that too. So Tommy, I see the skulls in back of you. Is that what you specialize in, or do you do like traditional deer mounts too?
Yeah, so for the last few years, this has kind of just been, it started as just like a hobby, and honestly, just, taxidermy, it's definitely not cheap. And for me, if I'm going to shoot a deer or an animal, whatever it is, if I'm going to get a full-on, traditional mount, I want to make sure that it's, a good-sized deer. In Vermont, we definitely have big deer in Vermont, but, they're pretty few and far between. So any of the deer that I shoot, I wanted to do something with them to honor them, but I didn't want to, pay all that money to get a full-on shoulder mount. So I started doing this for myself and for some buddies, and I just kind of enjoyed the work and, the whole process and everything. And it's just kind of turned into what it is today. So for right now, yes, I am specializing just on the European style. But end of May, I'm going to be taking a course out in Western New York so I can really dial in the process of, the lifelike taxidermy, so I can do full-on shoulder mounts and bigger projects just to kind of keep building my portfolio out and growing my business.
So what is a European mount?
So the European mount, it's just the skull cleaned up and whitened. So you get all the tissue off of it, and I do a peroxide soak. So the peroxide is what makes the skull nice and white. Gets the stink out of it and everything like that. But it's just kind of, a nice way to mount the deer if you, again, are looking to maybe save some money. Or also, if you don't have the space, shoulder mounts, they do take up quite a bit of space. And, this is pretty easy just to slap on the wall or put on your desk or on a, bookshelf or something.
So how did European mounts come about? I guess I'm more familiar with the traditional taxidermy mounts.
Yeah. I don't really know much of the history on it. But again, I think it's just, something that just came about for, just another option, I suppose,
So how did you originally get involved in this?
Yeah, it's, hunting's been in a part of me for quite some time. My father, initially, he's the one that got me into it. Him and my uncles out in Western New York, they've always hunted growing up, bird hunting, deer hunting, turkey, so on and so forth. So that's kind of how I got into hunting altogether. And again, this was, in deer hunting, you're out there for the meat, but, we'd be lying to you if we said we weren't looking for the trophy too. And again, I've always wanted to do something with every deer that I've shot, even whether it's a doe, or a small buck or, a good sized buck. But, the interest in hunting just kind of got me into doing this.
So when did you do your first one?
Let's see. I think it was 2018, I believe it was.
And
so
it seems
several
like
years ago.
It seems like by what I'm hearing on Facebook, it seems like you've developed a good reputation for good work.
I've definitely been working pretty hard at building my following and just offering, a high quality product and just building a brand, that people can get behind and, that gets people excited to get out in the woods. Obviously like what I'm doing, is a taxidermy service, but, what I'm also trying to do is just, inspire people to get out in the woods, maybe if you haven't, gotten into hunting yet or not, but also like trying to hold that tradition of hunting. I feel like as the older generations get older, people pass on, it's easy for things to kind of slip through the cracks and be forgotten about. And I think in today's world, especially with a lot of younger people, they're so glued to their phones and social media and, not getting outside and not really enjoying, what we have around us, that, I want to utilize social media to kind of tap into those people and,
right,
get them excited, for turkey season, deer season, whatever it may be. Yeah, I just, part of my mission statement really is, just keeping that tradition alive and keeping the stoke level high.
You certainly did grow up in a different time than I did, because it was back when I was growing up in the urban center of Newport.
Mm-hmm.
It was, if you were in a class, boys, I would say 8 out of 10 did some level of hunting.
Oh, absolutely.
But now I don't know, 20 boys in a class, how many would say they hunt in any form? I dare say they're in the minority, I suspect. In most classes, my two boys grew up hunting, but they went their different ways. Then once they went their different ways, I haven't hunted in years. So I think up in a time where I don't think hunting was the norm in every classroom.
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying. I do think that I grew up in a generation where we definitely did see a decline in, youth hunters, and I think hunting in general, and I don't really know why that is. Again, I do think like maybe the technology world kind of pushed people in different directions, but I do also think too, maybe just like not as many opportunities for people. We've been fortunate, to own, we have acreage out in Western New York that we hunt. It's been in the family for years. In Vermont, it's like, my buddy, he's got his deer camp. We've always had permission pieces, and 4 years ago, me and my wife bought our acreage up here in Westfield. So I've kind of always been fortunate to have that opportunity to have land to hunt. And I do think that maybe that's pushed people out a bit, with land getting bought up and, land getting posted and all that. And and so on and so forth. But I do think nowadays it takes some effort to find a piece to hunt. You got to do your research. You got to be knocking on doors. You got to be talking with landowners, or you do have the public land option. But that also, you're going to have a ton of guys out there, fighting for the same space, and it kind of brings its own challenges. But yeah, I do think though, with social media, I do see things kind of picking back up again though, and there's a lot of hunting groups out there now. They're making their YouTube channels, they have their Facebooks and Instagram pages, and I feel like we're finally kind of getting connected again. And I do think that there's more people getting out in the woods now. If there's one thing I've learned by doing this business here, I've had, I don't know how many people bring me their first deer, and we're not talking, we are talking like, some youth hunters. But I've been surprised at, how many adults are bringing me their first deer and, telling me that they're just getting into it now, and, they're excited to be out in the woods and, all that. So I do think we're kind of, we're on the incline a little bit.
Back when I was younger, I'm getting to be that age now, back when you start saying, back when I was a kid, I think there was less to do. So you took advantage of all your options, and one of them was hunting, and another one was fishing. But I find another group that's interesting is there. I've actually spoken to some former vegetarians who have actually, I won't say they've come full circle, but they understand that hunting is part of conservation, and they still don't support like trophy,
right?
Whatever that would be. Some people who've made that transition because and if you're going to eat meat, if you're going to eat, I understand people not wanting to hunt. But if somebody eats farm-raised meat but are against hunting, that seems a bit hypocritical. I actually appreciate vegetarians and vegans who at least stick behind what they believe. But
right.
With me, I have this thing. I will never kill anything I'm not going to eat. So I don't shoot crow. I wouldn't shoot a crow because
right.
But there's a lot of ethical hunters out there. So tell me this.
Oh, yeah.
When somebody brings you a head, do they actually just bring you the head, or they bring you the whole deer?
So I generally tried to push people to just, bring me from the neck up, because I don't need the rest of it. I will, if I need to dispose of it, I try to do my best to accommodate, but really what I'm looking for is just the parts that, I'm going to use, or, just the head, really. I have had a couple people, just, that have brought me like full on capes just because they don't know where to get rid of it. I've had some people bring me some deer to do and a bear actually from the Burlington area. So it's like, they're living within the city limits. They shoot this animal. What are they going to do with the pelt? You can't throw animal parts away anymore. So fortunately I have 20 acres of land here, so I can kind of just go dig a hole and dispose of it in that manner. But yeah, I try the less matter on it, the better.
So when you get a head, what's your first?
So generally, if it's frozen, we're gonna unthaw it. But my first step, you're gonna skin it up. So get all the fur off, get as much tissue off as you can. And that's going to go into the degreasing process, which I degrease my skulls for about a month, 4 to 5 weeks, just kind of depending on the animal.
What do you mean degrease?
So on underneath all that skin, you're gonna have fat on the animal, fat and grease. And what you want to do is you want to try to remove as much of that grease as you possibly can. Over time, some skulls will have a yellowing effect. So you get them nice and white like I have them here. If you don't get all that grease off, that grease is what's going to actually oxidize and turn yellow and stain it. So what you want to do is get as much of that off as you possibly can, before you go and simmer. I do the simmering method. There's hundreds of different methods out there. Everybody does it differently. But how I do it is, do that long degrease, and then I'll do a very light simmer. And after that, all the tissue will come off. And what you're wanting to do, like if you hard boil it, you're cooking that skull. You're cooking everything to it. When you simmer it lightly, you're just melting all that fat off. You're melting all the tissue off. And that's going to give you that nice, clean, white skull. And you're not going to get that real yellowing effect.
Now, I've known some people in past years, they've actually hung their skull outside for, I don't know if it's weeks or months, and let nature take its course. Is that the same thing, or is it not as good of a job?
Yeah, so I mean, if you don't care what they look like, that's definitely an option. And you can even bury them in the ground and let the bugs eat at it and all that. Generally, that's if you want them nice and white and clean, that's not the approach you want to take. What happens when they rot and they dry out like that is you get the grease and the fats in there. It's going to stain it, and it's going to pretty much be permanent within the pores of that skull. So it's real hard to get that out. So if you're looking for like a nice bright white and clean skull, that's definitely not the process to do. But you will. I look at like my father's generations, and generations before that. It's they're just looking to slap the thing on the wall and call it good. So I guess it really just comes down to preference. But yeah, I mean that's definitely a longer process for sure. If you're gonna bury it for a few months or leave it up in a tree or something for the birds to peck at. But definitely a old time approach to it for sure.
Right. So tell me this: after melting down, degreasing and everything, and handling these deer heads, does it incur venison, or does it rob you of your love of venison? What do you think?
It's definitely not the most glorified work, and I try to encourage people, if you're gonna sit on it for a bit, like stick it in your freezer. I've had some very ripe heads chopped off over the last few years, and it doesn't really change how I look at venison. If anything, it just I appreciate the animals so much, as far as providing me food and all that, and I want to make use of as much of it as I possibly can. So doing the mounts is just kind of an extension, of just why I'm out there, and just to get the meat and all that. But if anything, it's I don't know. I think I'm kind of desensitized now, and owning farm animals and all that too. It's like, I'm out there rolling in the mud and milking goats and dealing with chickens, scooping crap up and all that, and doing triage if somebody gets hurt out there. So it's kind of, I don't know. It's I'm pretty desensitized now. It's just kind of it's another task at this point.
So it's about 10 more minutes left. What else have you like for reasons coming? Do you do anything with turkeys?
Yeah, I can
Or
do
have
some
you gotten
fan
to that
mounts. I've done a few of them. I feel like not as many. I don't really have as many serious turkey hunters, that show up. I feel like right now it's a lot of big game hunters. Not to say that a lot of people I've met or in my circle even don't turkey hunt, but I don't know. I find I find that's a thing that's kind of picking up now too. I see a lot more YouTube groups and hunting groups and all that, kind of getting more fired up about turkey hunting and getting more people involved. But yeah, it is something I can do. Little fan mounts, or I can clean up one of their little skulls, and pretty much the sky's the limit.
Right. No such thing as a European turkey, assume.
You can European mount just about anything. I've done a couple turkey skulls actually, and it's a more very tedious process, and they're a lot more sensitive just because they don't really have much of a bone structure to their skull. But basically anything that's got a skull, you can do a little mount with it if you want. I've done all sorts of different things. Coyotes. The turkeys, deer, bear, you name it.
Have you ever been, like, do you set up any place where you have your stuff on display?
So I just actually did my first trade show this past January at the Yankee Sportsman Classic in Essex, and I'll be doing that again this coming January. And this August, I'm going to be heading down to Massachusetts for the big Hunt Stock event. It's a multi-day hunting festival where they have hundreds of different vendors and thousands of people just come and check things out. So I'll be heading down there, and I am going to be doing there's a gun show coming up at the Elks Club, not this weekend, but the weekend after, the 12th and 13th. So I'll be there set up on display too. So yeah, it is. It is something I'm trying to do more of now. Just kind of build awareness, build the brand out a bit more, and I sell clothing now too. I got my branding on sweatshirts, hats, hoodies, all that, t-shirts, and like the little shadow box up here, plaques, stuff like that. I try to sell some of those too. So it has, I'm kind of, again, in the process of continuing to build the business out and add more things, to kind of generate some revenue. And so I will be continuing to do more trade shows and all that as the opportunities arise.
I asked, at least those are friendly territory, because I was talking to a reenactor. There was an event, and he had a bunch. He was reenacting a different tree, and he had pelts there, fur, and he said it was amazing. Not one day goes by without somebody scolding him for having those pelts. But he is a reenactor. Thus, if he did not have the pelts, that would not be history. And basically, those people were asking him to whitewash the history. And so that, but your places you set up are friendly territory.
Yeah, I try to be I try to utilize my time wisely and effectively. I do work full time also for another company. So it's kind of, it's an after work kind of venture. It's a weekend kind of venture. So, if I'm gonna leave for the weekend and go set up somewhere, I do want to make sure I'm being impactful. Right. And again, it's not I also don't like stirring the pot either. Not everybody's into hunting. Not everybody appreciates taxidermy. So, I try to stay in my lane a bit, and go where the light lines are. But at the same time too, I am willing to have a conversation with anybody from all walks of life, and just kind of explain, why I do it. Just kind of rewind a bit to what you were saying about like the vegans and vegetarians and so on and so forth. I understand why people don't eat meat. And it's not, I don't feel good when I kill an animal. It's always that sense of remorse and sadness. But I take pride in, if I'm going to eat meat, it's something that I killed myself and butchered myself. So as far as, at home, if I'm out, at the bars or whatever, hanging out, I'll get a burger, or some wings or something. But like I have not bought meat from the grocery store in probably a decade now, at least. So anything that's, you know, being prepared here is venison or bear or turkey or, you know, whatever it is that, you know, I've harvested from the season prior. So I really do. I take my hunting serious because that's how I provide myself with meat for the years.
The producer of this show, Todd Peranto, he was a long-term vegetarian, and he came into his life and taught him the wonders of having a good burger. And so,
Oh yeah,
Todd, love changed his ways. So, more
it's funny how that'll happen sometimes.
So, so how can people learn more about you? Do you have, you know, website, contact information?
Yeah, absolutely. I got a Facebook page, so if you just look up Deadheads Taxidermy, you know, name's right underneath my name there. You'll find my Facebook. You can find me on Instagram, and then also you can go on my website, www.deadheadstaxidermy.com. And you can get all my contact info there, pricing, portfolios, you know, if there's any events that are coming up that I'm going to be at, any events that I'm sponsoring, you know, all that kind of information, and tons of photos and videos and all that kind of stuff. So, so a lot of ways to reach me if you need.
And to my readers out there, you'll also find his contact information in the April and May issues of the journal. So, so what more do you do? Do you do anything out of taxidermy, or did you cover most of it?
Yeah, I mean that generally covers everything I'm doing as, you know, a business itself. I mean, again, you know, I am kind of also blending in, you know, just different hunting content. You know, I really do try to work alongside of the other local businesses too. You know, one thing I've always appreciated that you've done with your journal is telling the story of the Northeast Kingdom, but also telling the story of the, you know, of the people, of the businesses and all that, and inviting everybody on. So I want to do a very similar thing and, you know, do everything I can to point people in the directions of, you know, whether it's hunting stores or, you know, butchers or, you know, whatever it may be, you know, just kind of continue to build that community and, you know, network and all that.
Okay, well, I think it was great having you on, and hopefully you have a great, as I said, turkey hunting's coming. Then you know what? At a blink
Oh
of
yeah.
an eye, at the blink,
Oh yeah.
snap of the finger, fall deer hunting will begin.
It'll be here before we know it.
Okay, well,
But,
thank you
yeah,
for coming on.
I do appreciate it. Yeah,
Great,
thank you, Scott.
you. And thank you to the viewers for tuning in to another segment of the Northeast